Welcome to our afternoon class, and thank you for coming. This is a great opportunity that we have to hear from a guest speaker. I just want to take a couple of minutes to remind everybody on a few things. One, for those of you that are veterans or know veterans, tomorrow is Veterans Day. And if you don't know the difference between Veterans Day and Memorial Day, you need to find out, because there is a difference. Some people just don't understand it, but for those that are veterans and those that are either online or know them, thank you for your service. I know that sounds trite. I don't mean it to be trite. From a family that had my father in the U.S. Air Force, my two sons-in-law in the Air Force, I appreciate the service that you give. Just a couple of quick things. Today is a birthday. Who knows whose birthday it is today? The Marines. All right, Michael, you were here. How old are the Marines today? Well, you're 47 years young. 247 years today. This is the birthday for the Marine Corps. Semper Fi. Oh, I don't have any idea.
It was in 1776, right after we became a country, and it was against the pirates of Tripoli.
I was going to say, the pirates. See, the things that you learn in Elder Quest, just with the announcements. Okay, the other thing is, we have our December holiday luncheon coming up on the 7th of December. We want you to make your RSVPs now, because it's coming up right away. Let me give you the phone number for Nancy. If you haven't got it already, those of you that are online, grab a pencil. Those of you that are here, grab a pencil also, or grab something, or just remember it. And remember it, it'll be put on, it's on our newsletter. You know what it is. It's in our emails also. We give the phone number, but I want to give it out to you in person. So RSVP for this, it'll be the 7th of December, 801-822-2326. We need to have these reservations in a week ahead of time. So it's the 7th of December. The 1st of December is when we will send in our tally so that we can have enough meals for everybody. We want everyone to come because this is a special event for December 7th. And Gwen, no, we will not forget that that is Pearl Harbor Day also. I think she just threatened me. I really do. Okay, here's the number again. 801-822-2326. It's in the chat for those of you that are online. So anyway, thank you for coming. Next week is our last week. The last thing I have is, please bring a friend next week. They don't have to be a member of ElderQuest, but it's a great opportunity as we end up our semester to give people an opportunity to see what we do, who we are, and the such sedate and quiet people that we are. After this morning's class, I know that's not the truth, but I appreciate each one of you. And Wayne, are you going to introduce our guest speaker? Okay, I'm going to give the microphone to Wayne.
This is Dr. Bryan Turner. I forgot what he's going to do. Shoot. Bryan's a good friend. Very, very, go ahead and test him to his limits. I mean, we've been friends for a lot of years and he's withstood me. So what he's got to say is a lot more important than me. So Bryan Turner, Dr. Bryan Turner.
Thank you, Wayne. All right. Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Wayne, for inviting me. And I'll reiterate what you were saying about the veterans. I have a lot of friends who are veterans, and I really appreciate the service they've done to our country, because we need all the help we can get that way. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about memory and Alzheimer's disease, maybe a little bit about Parkinson's disease, and some things that you guys can do to help yourselves and maybe help other people at the same time. So I am a medical doctor. I have a practice at the American Wellness and Rehab Clinic up in Salt Lake City in Murray, Utah. Before that, I was a veterinarian, so I have a couple of doctoral degrees. And I'm the medical director of our program called the Hope Memory Care and Brain Center up there at the American Wellness. And we've put together through a foundation that I have called the Natural Goodness Foundation. We put together this thing called the Cross DNA study. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that and its relationships to Alzheimer's. Okay, so this should change. There we go. So the DNA, Cross DNA study is a collaboration that we have with the foundation called the Natural Goodness Foundation. So it is a charitable 501c3. We teamed up with a company called True DNA Story. So believe it or not, there's about 9 different genetic markers for Alzheimer's disease, and there's over 20 genetic markers for Parkinson's disease. And so part of the study is we're looking at people's genomes and trying to correlate what their genetic risk factors are compared to what's happening that way. And then, of course, we're correlating ourselves with the American Wellness and Rehab Clinic's Hope Memory and Care and Brain Center. All right. Okay, so to start with, here's how you can make a breakthrough in Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease. You can either volunteer to qualify, if you qualify for the study. You can refer others who may qualify for the study. You can certainly donate, and it is a charitable tax-deductible donation, or you can get others to donate. And so I do believe the brain is our final frontier. It's one of the most fascinating organs that we have. There's so much about it that we don't know, and for all the experts who think we got it all figured out, the reality is we've got very little of it figured out, and for every question we do answer, we get 10 more questions. So we're far from that. But if you have any interest in the study, you can go to that website, crossdnastudy.org, and they'll give you some more information that way. Okay, and these are the people involved. So you can see we've got some high-powered medical doctors and computer scientists and people involved with PhDs and things like that that are involved. So the basic premise of this study is everybody's told they have Alzheimer's disease or they're told they have Parkinson's disease. And if you listen to the Alzheimer's Association, it's a one-way ticket down and you need to get your affairs in order, and that's kind of it. We believe that because there's all these different genetic markers, that they actually may be different subclassifications of the disease, right? And it may be that this subclassification needs to be treated differently than this subclassification, and same with Parkinson's. So if we can delineate all that, then that can make a huge difference. So part of the study is going to be looking at the genome, your genetic risk factors. And then part of the study is going to be looking at your microbiome, which is the stuff that lives in your guts. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So I want to start this talk pretty much talking about Dr. Bruce Lipton's book called The Biology of Belief. Have y'all seen this book or heard about this book? It's been out for quite a while, but it's actually pretty good. So the interesting thing is that our brains are so powerful that what we believe actually makes tremendous difference in our lives, right? So a lot of people get told they got this diagnosis and their belief system is immediately, I'm dying, or immediately, my life's going to be miserable from here on out. And we have to, first of all, break that, right? Because that's not necessarily the case. In Dr. Lipton's research, he actually took people's cells, put them in a culture dish, moved them to the other side of the building, completely away from where they were studying, and started asking questions. And actually, if you start having like negative thoughts about your body, it had an effect on cells on the other side of the building that are completely separated from you. So it's quite amazing research, but it is the power of our belief systems, right? And I don't know if y'all ever seen this movie. There's a cult movie out called What the Bleep, if you ever seen that one. It's actually worth watching. It's a kind of a metaphysical movie, documentary kind of a thing. But it also has some interesting things in there. And in the story, there's this deaf lady who's got some pretty severe depression, is kind of making her way through. And she's in a subway system. And there is a water display from this Japanese researcher who froze water at different levels, right? And he took these jars of water, and one he labeled beautiful, On another, he labeled, wonderful and just put all these things about it. And then a whole another batch, he named them ugly, hateful, and whatever. And if you look at the water crystals on those, and I don't have pictures of those, but the difference in the water crystals that form based on the energy that we put into that kind of stuff has a very direct effect on how the water crystallizes into its little ice crystals. And so if you imagine that, we're 75 to 80% water, and if you put negative thoughts into your system, you are damaging what makes up most of us, right? All right, so it's interesting because we all know that the brain is our control center, right? You can't do anything without a brain, which is kind of true, except that there's more neurotransmitters in your gut for serotonin specifically than there is in your brain. And so there's this thing called the gut-brain connection, which is why we're looking at the microbiome in our gut, because the bacteria that make up our gut have a big effect on what we think about. And there's some very interesting studies out now that show that you can take some people who are like really depressed and you can do a poop transplant and you can change their mood, which is kind of a strange thing, right? So our gut actually has a lot to do with how our brains work. And so because the gut has more neurotransmitters than serotonin, the gut will influence our brain activity. We all believe that the cell nucleus, the cells are the components that make us up, and then there's little things inside the cell. There's the brain center of the cell called the nucleus. There's an energy center called the mitochondria. You got our cell membrane. So all these organelles is what they're called. So we all have been led to believe that the cell nucleus is the brain center of a cell. But you can take this nucleus out of a cell and it'll still function. It'll still do the things that it needs to do for the most part. But if you take away the cell's membrane, it'll die instantly, right? So the nucleus is not necessarily the control center that we're led to believe, because it can be removed without causing immediate cell death. All right, so genes, we've been told since Crick and Watson developed the gene theory that genes are who you are, right? They determine the color of our eyes, whether we're man or woman. And I know there's a lot of people who get confused about their gender these days, but that's not scientific, right? So, but genes don't turn themselves on, right? And they can't turn themselves off. They have to be influenced. And so many experts have misled us about the nature of genes. And now there's this whole big field opening up called epigenetics, which is how we can control the genes, because you can turn genes on and you can turn genes off. So just because you have a gene that says that you're at risk for Alzheimer's, that doesn't mean you're going to get Alzheimer's. That means that if you live a lifestyle that turns those genes on, that your risk is going to go much higher for somebody who doesn't have that gene. So our environment, both externally and internally, can activate or deactivate through signaling molecules our genetic blueprint. So that's the field of epigenetics. So the conclusion that we can do with this biology of belief is that the cell membrane is the controller of our cell functions because it has the ability to sense and perceive our environment. Sometimes mistakes are made and those perceptions become inaccurate. Those perceptions are our beliefs, and therefore your beliefs have a direct influence on your cellular physiology. Your genetics as the blueprint of how to respond to your environment is how you perceive it, both at a cellular level and holistically as a total person. So your belief system, we'll take questions at the end of the conference. That's exactly what you get. All right, so it's pretty fascinating. That's why I wanted to start this talk about the biology of belief, because what you believe really matters. And so you have to start thinking positively, and even about aging. I mean, I know as we get older, it sucks, right? I mean, we don't see as well. We lose muscle mass, we lose our hair, everything goes down, right? And so it's not easy growing older. But there's a wisdom in age, and I think the youth of this country need to start tapping into the wisdom of age, because they clearly have lost that. Okay, so through our cross DNA study in the Hope Memory Care and Brain Center, we believe there is hope for people afflicted with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And this hope is based on published clinical results, people who have effectively stopped their neurodegenerative progression and who have recovered lost cognitive abilities. The study that we're doing is designed to help stratify these individuals into not just one disease, but into subcategories that each different approach may result in a successful treatment. So that published results is the work of Dr. Del Bredesen. Maybe some of you have seen him on TV. I believe he's been on Oprah, but he's been on some of the news stories. He's a research biologist who many years ago, he wrote a book called The End of Alzheimer's. And he's published now over 100 cases of documented Alzheimer's disease, where when they're put on the right program, they reverse their cognitive disorders. And Dr. Marty Hintz, who's a colleague of mine and a friend out of Florida, has developed a nutritional program to help with Parkinson's disease. And he now has Parkinson's patients who are no longer tremoring, who are not taking any medication, but are on an amino acid protocol that he developed because he's a biochemist. So we believe there is hope. And I think in terms of belief, for anybody who is suffering from memory loss or anybody who's suffering from Parkinson's disease or has loved ones or friends who are, that's the belief that we need to start with, is that there is hope. Okay, so kind of the rest of my slideshow is not really my slides. They're part of my colleagues on the rest of this talk. So I'm going to go back to this first one. And we're just going to talk about Alzheimer's, and then I will open up here at the end of the talk here in, what do I have, Wayne, about another 15 minutes? It's about 15 after. All right. Okay. I have until 2. So, okay. So in about 20, 25 minutes or so, we'll just open this up to questions. And those of you on the Zoom call, if you guys want to ask questions on Zoom, then we'll get that moderated as well. So what is, well, let's take the overall arching picture. What is dementia? So dementia is a loss of not just memory, but also cognitive function. So you have to be losing more than just memory. You have to lose the ability to either like do your finances or manage just basic things. Dementia is this overall umbrella of neurodegenerative diseases. And so Alzheimer's is one form of that, which was first discovered or first recognized by Dr. Alzheimer, who was a German physician who had a patient that was rather young, who was losing things. And when they did the autopsy on her, he noticed, the plaques and the things that were going on. So those plaques and that information, has kind of led the whole Alzheimer's research. And up until earlier this year, I mean, millions upon millions of dollars were poured into these drugs on how do we stop these plaques, because that's the cause of Alzheimer's. But then earlier this year it came out that that original research was fraudulent. And so it's really kind of disgusting what happens sometimes in the medical research world and in the pharmaceutical industry. But that's the way it is. And so we've had all these millions of dollars poured into research that was chasing down the wrong rabbit hole, where some researcher decided to make up some data to prove his point rather than to follow the research and take it to where it logically would lead us. So, and again, that's another, I think, in my mind, that's another reason to have hope, right? Because now we have another whole directions to go. In the pharmaceutical industry, as you guys have known our entire lives, going, before even you were born, because going back into the late teens and early 1920s, the Rockefellers kind of took control of the pharmaceutical industry and the medical training, education, and all those kind of things like that. And everything has been kind of geared toward the one drug, one disease type of a bullet, right? So we're looking for one drug to treat Alzheimer's. And the reality is that probably doesn't exist, right? And the drugs that we do have don't really work. And sometimes they can make matters worse. They can make things better for a little while, but then they tend to make things more worse. And I'm from the old school of medicine where I still follow that principle, where I believe in the Latin term is primum non nocere, above all, do no harm. As you've witnessed over the last 2 years, I mean, that's gone out the window, right? We now do things to harm people without thinking about it, and it's gotten kind of sad that way. But dementia is this overall arching picture of neurodegenerative decline. Alzheimer's is one form of dementia. Parkinson's is another form of dementia. There's a disease called Pick's disease. If anybody's heard of Pick's disease, or frontal temporal dementia, that's another form. And then there's Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is another group of German guys that came up with this prion kind of disease, which it's kind of like human mad cow disease. So, and it turns out my grandmother was the 13th person in the Mayo Clinic to be diagnosed with that disease back in the early 70s. So brain diseases is kind of important to my thinking. That's one of my biggest fears, I think, is waking up one day, realizing I used to have 2 doctoral degrees and now I'm just looking at a ceiling, right? So we want to kind of address these things so we can stay young. So Dr. Bredesen, in his research, came up with this theory or this idea that it's not one thing that causes Alzheimer's, it's as many as 36 different things, and everything kind of works together. So if you have a hole in the roof, you could put a bucket underneath it and stay dry. But if you got 30 holes in your roof, you're going to get wet, right? And the good news is our brains are what we call plastic. It means that they can heal themselves if we allow that to happen. So if we start plugging the holes, we don't necessarily have to plug every hole to its maximum, but we have to plug enough holes so that the degeneration stops and the brain can start to heal. Because our brain is what's in our brain and our skulls is more than our brains, right? We have our immune system is in there. There's a blood-brain barrier that's kind of keeps things protected. But there's all these blood vessels and lymphatics, and there's all this other stuff there that's used to help support to how our brains work. So Dr. Bredesen has discovered that if we provide the right building blocks, the right nutrition, then we can support the healing of the brain. And for over 20 years now, I've been teaching people that it takes only 2 things to heal any injury or illness, just 2. One is you have to remove the roadblocks that keep you from getting better. And the other is you've got to provide the right building blocks so that your body can heal. And the third step is the hardest one of all for us doctors, which is to get out of the way, right? So with 100 patients that are now published having turned their Alzheimer's around, then what do we do? So with our cross-DNA study, what we're going to do is we're going to take a very extensive blood test, and we're going to look for as many of these holes as we can find, right? It could be things like the omega-3s in your diet. So are you getting enough fish in your diet, or are you taking fish oil supplements? Are you getting enough seed oils like pumpkin seed or flaxseed or borage oil? Are you getting all those omega fatty acids that your brain needs? Because our brain, besides being plastic, is mostly fat, right? But it's got to be the healthy kind of fat so that the connections can work. Are you getting enough vitamin D, right? So vitamin D is a big issue. Most people in Utah are somewhat deficient in vitamin D unless they're supplementing. And everybody knows it as the sunshine vitamin, right? So you just have to go out and get a little sunshine, which works great if you're in Costa Rica, right? But up here, this far north on the latitude, there's a very specific wavelength of light that converts the vitamin D precursors in our skin into the active form of vitamin D. And because we live so far north on the planet, most of that wavelength is bouncing off the atmosphere. So even if you're laying out naked in the winter, you're probably not getting enough of the sunlight to convert vitamin D in your skin. So you really got to make sure you're supplementing some vitamin D or take a cruise, right? So do something to get some good vitamin D. I think most people have heard of vitamin B12, cyanocobalamin, or methylcobalamin, I think is the preferred form. So vitamin B12 is important for a lot of our blood forming, and a lot of it has to do with how our brain works. And along with it comes folic acid. As we age, there is an enzyme in our stomachs that is one of the things that we start to lose. As we lose everything else, we lose this thing called intrinsic factor. If you don't have enough intrinsic factor, you're not absorbing enough B12. And so it's easy to get deficient in B12. And if you're low on B12, that can be one of the contributing factors to neurodegenerative diseases. So we really do recommend people supplement with vitamin B12, and you can get these little like wafer things that will dissolve in your mouth, and then you can absorb them much better without having to go through the whole digestive system. So B12 is important as well. There's all these anti-inflammatories. Like, the Indian population uses a lot of turmeric in spicing their food. The active ingredient in turmeric is curcumin, which is a very potent anti-inflammatory. And it turns out with Alzheimer's disease in particular, Dr. Bredesen has divided it into 5 categories of disease based on whether somebody's got whether their Alzheimer's is caused by diabetes, or whether it's inflammatory or some mixture of the two, or whether there's some toxin involved in their life, right? So things like heavy metals, like lead poisoning, for example. I mean, all that can lead to some neurodegenerative stuff, or infectious things. Syphilis can lead to neurodegenerative disease. Fortunately, that's mostly wiped out these days, but there's still probably some other infections that can get in there that can lead to all that. So we do these extensive blood tests. We're looking for all these different little factors that we can start helping people with, that most neurologists and most internists, I mean, they're not looking at this extensive of testing. They're pretty quick to put people on their Aricept and call it good, right? Tell them to get their affairs in order. But we find besides Dr. Bredesen's patients that he's published, we find in our clinical practice that we can help people. We can actually turn things around. We have a Harvard professor who was kind of losing his words, but he's still doing speaking engagements, kind of like I'm doing here. And after he got on the nutritional program, his ratings are going through the roof. He's really happy because he's able to say what he needs to say. People are understanding his concepts, and he's teaching what he needs to teach. And it's made a real difference for his life, so we're really happy to do that. So let me talk a little bit about Parkinson's disease. So Parkinson's disease is a movement disorder. And so that's where people will start with a little bit of a tremor, right? And they get a little stiff and their joints get a little bit of ratchetiness, right? And over time, they can get some brain disorder with that as well. So one of the risks for Parkinson's disease is one of the 20 genetic risk factors that we'll be testing for is involved. But excess amounts of the mineral iron has been associated with some Parkinson's as well. And so if you're not able to get rid of iron, so, young women can have their monthly cycle and they get rid of iron pretty quickly. Men and postmenopausal women don't have a really good way of losing iron. So we just keep accumulating it. And if you are taking iron through your meats primarily, the system is opened up and we just absorb all that iron in. And it doesn't matter if you have enough iron or you don't have enough iron. It just opens the gates. If you're getting your iron through plant sources, somehow our bodies know how to regulate that iron better, and we don't absorb as much of the plant-based iron. And so Dr. Grieber wrote a book called How Not to Die. Have you guys seen that one? So he and Dr. Armstrong, who years ago had written a book called The China Study, and Dr. Pritikin also, you've probably heard of Dr. Pritikin, who developed a cancer protocol based on a vegetarian diet. They strongly all push, for a high vegetarianism in the diet. Now, I don't think that means you have to be a vegan, and I don't think you have to go to extremes, but we certainly do not eat enough fruits and vegetables in our typical SAD diet. SAD standing for Standard American Diet. So I do encourage everybody, eat as many different colors of vegetables as you can, the red peppers, the yellow peppers, and they have sweet peppers, they don't have to worry about them being too hot sometimes, right? There's jicamas. I mean, there's things that are in the grocery store that most people end up leaving it be or throwing into soups and things. But it's really important that we do eat healthy to get all these nutrients, these building blocks that we have. And then the second part of surviving to old age is getting rid of the roadblocks, right? So we live this life and we live in a polluted world. And a lot of people kind of, maybe not so much anymore, but people used to argue, well, it's not that bad. We're a big old planet, it cleans itself and we do pretty good. But there was studies that have been done So one from the US Department of Agriculture shows that our food supply from 1964 compared to 22 years ago in 2000, that we have approximately half the nutrients in the food compared to 1964. So if you want to eat a bunch of spinach to get your magnesium, for example, you need to eat twice as much. But we already have an obesity problem. So, I mean, it's like almost a no-win situation. You really kind of need your own organic garden, you know, to kind of make things work. But these roadblocks that keep us from getting better, we have to regularly go through some detox programs, right? So detoxifying can happen a number of ways. We only have just a few ways to get rid of things out of our body, right? We can breathe it out or do our normal elimination processes, or you can cry it out, or you can sweat it out. So I'm a big believer in saunas, right? And you can get an infrared sauna if you don't want to do the old Norwegian roll in the snow and get in the steam bath kind of a thing. But doing a sauna, even if it's just 10 minutes a few times a week, and I don't know if they have one here or not, but or what other gyms that you might join to, having a sauna is a good way to start eliminating a lot of the toxins you have. And then we use a lot of nutritional supplements to help with our liver drainage and our kidney drainage, you know, and to try to get so that our elimination processes work better. So another big factor that comes in play is exercise, right? Because I mean, I understand. I mean, it's not fun. I don't like to exercise myself. It's one of those things you have to understand that it's if you don't like doing it, you have to learn to like the results of what you do when you do it, right? And so, well, I'll use my mother as an example. She just got back from a trip to Israel. She's 82 years old, and she and my little niece went, and they had a great time. And there were people on the trip who tripped and broke an ankle or, you know, things like that. But fortunately, my mother had been exercising all through the summer and building up her stamina, her strength. And she had this outstanding, you know, once in a lifetime trip to Israel. Something that she wished that she and my dad could have done years ago, right? But exercise is critical. So then the question is, and this is rhetorical for you, Wayne, is what kind of exercise should you be doing? So aerobic exercise is really important. So you should be walking, getting on a treadmill, getting on a bicycle. Swimming is actually really good if you can swim, and you're never too old to learn, right? So if you don't know how to swim, even as a senior, then, well, this class is a really good example. Mr. Wilson and I were talking earlier about this. This class is designed to teach elder people how to continue to think, how to continue to learn, right? So learning to swim, if you don't know how to swim, is a great time to learn, right? Getting in the water helps you a lot. Learning to dance. I know a lot of the guys, I tell a lot of my guys with early forms of dementia, you know, their wife likes to dance. They don't. They never did learn to dance with, you know, when they were young. I said, you know, get on YouTube and learn the steps, because dancing really becomes one of those critical exercises, because you have to coordinate with the music. You have to coordinate your steps and memorize your steps. You have to coordinate with your partner. I mean, it's a lot of brain activity to be able to dance and to even halfway well, right? So, and if you don't have a partner, then just dance by yourself, right? There's all kinds of line dances and things out there that people do. And so dancing is a great form of exercise. It doesn't have to be real strenuous. You don't have to get into bodybuilding kind of stuff to be exercising, right? Just a little aerobic exercise, learning to dance, learning to swim, learning yoga, learning Tai Chi. I mean, all that kind of stuff all makes our brains learn new things. And when we learn new things, we're pruning old connections that don't work for us, and we're building new connections so that our brain stays active. And that, I think, is a good way to help keep these plaques from forming. That's turning on your epigenetics, right? That's your internal environment controlling whether a gene gets turned on or whether it doesn't get turned on. So I think all of those kind of things are really important to maintain all your vitality, basically, is what it amounts to, right? My oldest patient lived to be 105. And she was in actually pretty good health until she was 105 and had another lived to be 102. And when I have a 75-year-old or an 80-year-old patient come in, they say, I'm getting old, Dr. Turner, you know, kind of time to give it all up. It's like, how could that be? You got another 20, 25 years that could be a good life, right? I mean, you could have another kid in 25 years, right? So, or adopt one, right? So, right, not really. But there's decades, potential decades of healthy living that are out there, right? And it's tough. They did studies of people who live to be 100 and older, and there are really about 5 areas around the world that's common. You know, like Loma Linda, California, with all the Seventh-day Adventists. I mean, they're all vegetarians. They all have healthy attitudes, and it's not untypical for them to live to be 100 and older. Or down in Costa Rica, the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica. There's a guy out there, he's 103 years old and he's still out riding horses. I mean, how many 60-year-olds can't even get in and out of a car, right? Right? This guy's gonna be able to climb on the horse. There's a place in Greece, a place in Italy, and then there's Okinawa, Japan. These places they call the blue zones, right? So there are places where people commonly can live to be 100 in good health, right? But you have to make it happen. It just doesn't happen on its own, right? You got to have the right attitude. In fact, for the Centurion studies, they really found that attitude was the thing that allowed them to live to be that old, right? I mean, many of them had lost their children. They lost their friends, right? So like, you know, you start losing your children and your friends, you got like, what am I living for? Well, that's it. You have to have the belief when you wake up every morning, there's something to get up for, right? And there always is. I mean, you just have to look at these mountains out here and the beauty of the natural world out there to know that there really is something greater than ourselves. And that's, to me, that's the thing to get up for, right? If you start thinking only about ourselves, you know, we get to become very selfish, and which is why depression, you know, is a very self-centered space to be in. And I'm not saying, you know, anything against people who are depressed. I treat depressed people all day long, right? But when you get to the bottom of it all, it's a space where they're really focused just on me. And I think this is true for everybody as we grow older and even in our youth. If we stay focused on helping other people, right? If we're there to be of service to the rest of our family and our friends and neighbors and things like that, I mean, that's something to get up for every morning, right? And then there's no excuse to say, I'm too old, I can't get up this morning. Okay, so back to the cross-DNA study. We do believe there's hope. I do believe in the power of your belief in order to have a healthy life. So you really have to focus on that. And if you want to help on the study, you can go to crossdnastudy.org. Right now, we're a little bit underfunding. We're hoping that we'll get some funding coming in here shortly to be able to do it. But if anybody does want to participate, most studies cost about $20,000 per patient to do that. But we have, between our clinic and the True DNA Story people, we've cut that cost down to about $3,000 per patient. So if somebody does want to participate, they can make a tax deductible donation to the True DNA Cross DNA study, get a tax write-off, and then they can participate in the study. Or you can be on a waiting list if you want to be on a waiting list, and then we have a promise of several $100,000 coming in. So once that arrives, you know, then we'll have some funding to start enrolling people again. So, but if you don't want to wait, then you can make your own tax deductible donation. Okay, so we have about maybe 20 minutes. So I'll open this up for anybody who wants to ask questions, as Wayne has pointed out. Yes, ma'am.
You talked about detoxing and included saunas and exercise and swimming, aerobics, and all of that, which is really great. Does fasting and the onset of autophagy help to detox as well?
Actually, it does. So, so there's a form of fasting called intermittent fasting. You may have heard about that. That's gotten more and more popular, and there's a lot of research that's backing it up. The Mediterranean diet's another good healthy diet to follow because it has lots of the oils. But intermittent fasting will stimulate your body into this thing called autophagy, which is where your cells know that they're dying and the rest of your immune system can gobble those up and get them out of the way. And your stem cells can create new cells and keep the regeneration going.
So how many hours do you have to fast before autophagy kicks in?
About 15 is my understanding.
Oh, not bad.
So, right, it's basically an overnight fast, skip breakfast. And actually, if you exercise in the morning on your fast, you'll actually burn a little more fat that way as well. So just don't overdo things, right, when you're hungry, and make sure you stay well hydrated. And that's the other big factor.
I just wanted to ask if you had to have symptoms to participate in the study.
Yes, so to qualify for the
what
study,
I-
we are looking for people who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or at least mild cognitive impairment. So.
You had mentioned a medication if you had symptoms. What was the name of that doctors?
Just handing out.
Oh, the one they're handing out. Generally, it's Aricept or Namenda. Those are the two drugs that people are prescribed when they're told they have Alzheimer's disease. So the theory is it slows the progression of the dementia, but it doesn't work for very long, and then it actually can make things progress faster after that. So, yes, sir. Oh, wait, I guess, lady, yeah.
Have you followed any of the research of the neurodegenerative tangle diseases and the use of L-serine, the amino acid? Dr. Paul Cox is doing that collaboratively with lots of people. Have you?
Right. So
studied-
serine, phosphatidylserine, or the L form of the serine is all chemistry stuff. So, so serine is one of the important amino acids that do that. Particularly with Lou Gehrig's disease or ALS,
specific.
serine seems to be somewhat effective in helping, but I have used it on Lou Gehrig's patients, and it didn't cure them. So, but it does seem to help on some, not everybody, but on some.
Okay, you said to be concerned about your iron level. Good or bad to have an iron infusion if the doctor orders it?
Well, if the doctor orders it, then it's good to have it because that means you're probably low blood or have some form of anemia. And then you need that iron for your bone marrow to be able to make it, right? So the problem isn't our so much iron in the blood, it's that your total body burden of iron goes up, right? Now, there's a group, the Jehovah's Witnesses, that won't do transfusions, right? No matter what. And I think, there's extremes to that end, which, is not such a good thing for many people. But on the same token, getting a blood transfusion, as lay people, it's really hard to make that line as to, okay, at what point do I get the transfusion, right? Sometimes you don't get to make that choice because you're in an intensive care unit or you got chemotherapy, you got all this other stuff happening. But if you're in a place to kind of decide and you can arrest some of the loss and not do the transfusion, that's not always the unwisest decision, right? Sometimes if you can build up your iron without the transfusions, but that's not always the case. And you definitely have to be working with a practitioner or your provider who's knowledgeable about all this and is open to having discussions about it even, which is sometimes hard to find too, right? Yes, Roger.
There's a supplement that gets a lot of advertising called Prevagen. Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with Prevagen. It seems to help some, but it's not one of the supplements that we use in our study. And there's anecdotal evidence, that it can in some cases be supportive, but it certainly doesn't seem to turn things around or fix a lot of things. So
It's quite expensive. So
I don't have any control of the pricing of these things. I will tell you one thing. So there is a law called the Deshay Law, which is the law that allows supplement companies to make their supplements, right? It's a little different than the FDA rules. So for example, if I create a drug, then the FDA, we do all these studies about it, and then there's a tolerance level, right? So each pill or each batch has to have either a little bit more or a little bit less of the drug. I mean, there's a range of making these things right? But it has to be pretty close, right? If it's outside of that range, then the FDA will recall the batch and say, your drug is not to specs, right? In the supplement business, it's the company that tells the FDA what the tolerance is going to be. And this is where it gets really kind of disgusting and makes me upset. Because like if I'm a unscrupulous vitamin C salesman, right? I can make a vitamin C that I label at 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, and I can tell the FDA that it's going to have a 25% tolerance, right? Which means I'll have anywhere from 750 to 1,250 milligrams of vitamin C in each capsule that I'm selling for 1,000. And of course, I'm only going to put 750 in it because I'm an unscrupulous guy, right? So now I'm selling 750 things and everybody believes they're 1,000 and you have no way of knowing, right? Unless you test, each batch separately. So you want to, when you do choose supplements, despite the cost of them, and just because they're expensive supplements on some of them doesn't necessarily mean they're the best quality supplements that are out there. But make sure you try to do your best if you can that you have a supplement company that's making the best quality that you can find. Yes, ma'am.
I I've observed that sometimes the dementia diagnosis is people are diagnosed as dementia, and from that point on, it's almost they're living the script. I have no dementia. I can't do this. I can't do. Why are they often so fast in their diagnosis?
Why are doctors fast at making the
Yes, very
diagnosis?
fast.
So, well, there are criteria. So if we do a test called a MOCA test, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. So if you're doing this test and you score below a certain level, then we can say that you have cognitive decline. I do tend to agree people are kind of fast to make diagnoses. I think a lot of it is marketing, right? A lot of it's the fear. It's like with the antibiotics. If you have a cold and you come to me and say, you say, I want an antibiotic. I said, but you got a virus, not a bacteria. You don't really need it. Well, a lot of people end up going down the street to the next guy and then bad mouthing you for not doing the antibiotics. It's not a good scene, right? So with dementia, the same thing. I mean, people come in, they're having problems, they get an answer, right? It may not always be the right answer. I mean, there are situations where people are on so many medications, and it's the medications that are kind of, for lack of better phraseology, it's dumbing them down, right? And if we can adjust their medications, then just maybe, they'll wake up.
The thought that you have something terrible wrong with you. Okay, talking about a positive attitude. Immediately the attitude is negative. This is not anyone. There's no hope for me.
So that's where people have to be their own advocates, right? I mean, and I've seen this many times, whether it's dementia or whether it's cancers, right? Somebody comes in, some doctor says, well, you got cancer, we're going to start chemo, but there's no biopsy involved. And the people are convinced that I don't have cancer. And through the power of belief, I mean, there's some pretty powerful, miraculous stories of people healing themselves for any number of things because their belief system was such that they were able to affect their own physiology and either, destroy the cancer cells or whatever thing was happening, make it happen, right? So, yes, ma'am.
Did I hear you right? I think I heard you say that water can tell that you hate it or something. It can feel.
Well, I don't think we can anthropomorphize, physical substances quite to that extent. But there is truth to everything has an energy flow to it, right? I mean, Einstein pretty much proved everything is energy, whether it's us physically or whether it's a ray of light, it's all interchangeable, right? And so that energy can be transferred. And our attitudes.
Our attitude is energy.
Our attitude is energy, right?
And the water reflects our attitude.
I think that happens, right? I mean, you can do that with plants too. I've seen this with experiments with plants where you grow plants and you label the plants with love and care. There's I
Well,
mean,
I
there's,
know if you talk to them, you're giving them oxygen. I mean, whatever you give them.
but
no.
are you giving them enough oxygen clinically
the
to
opposite of
actually make them
oxygen.
grow? Or is
Anyway,
it the energy of the care that you're giving them?
so I was just wondering if the water thinks, but it's reflecting you.
I think it reflects, I think all matter reflects the energy, right? No, I think it's kind of wrongful thinking or error of judgment to say that it thinks like humans can think, or like a, you know.
So we can control the environment around us because it reflects us.
It does. It does. And you can take bad situations and how you respond to the bad situation. I mean, that's what life is really all about, right? You can't always control what happens, but you can control how you respond to it. So yes, ma'am.
Okay. Question about signing up for your study.
Mm-hmm.
My brother had Alzheimer's. I don't think I've got any symptoms, but sometimes I wonder, what are my chances of developing? Because my brother, our DNAs will be different because he
Right.
has a different mother
Okay.
than I have.
Well, even
But
if you had
would
the same
would
mother,
I
you'd have
be
different genetics.
a possible person for your study?
Yeah, you can certainly come talk to me afterwards and we can take your information.
Okay,
Or you can go to that website, crossdnastudy.org.
I'll talk to you after.
I was really interested in what you said about how energy makes a big difference in the way your physiology repairs itself even. My 98-year-old father was in a rehab center that loved him, that would get him up out of bed and race him down the halls. He kissed him on the forehead and he did very, very well. But then he had to move to a different rehab center and they didn't give beans about him. And he died 3 weeks later. And so I always wondered if that lack of love and caring was what really did it.
Well, I can't speak to that individual situation.
But that's a possibility.
But it certainly makes sense to me. I mean, look at all these people who in the COVID world, particularly in New York and the places where people weren't allowed to see their loved ones, right? Or somebody was sent with COVID to a rehab center and like nobody was really caring about stuff. These people did not thrive. They did not. Or you look at Romania and all these little babies that were put into these orphanages and they weren't held, they weren't cuddled, you know, they were tossed a bottle so they could feed themselves, and they all developed this reactive attachment disorder. They never learned how to interact with others.
So that has to make a difference. Also, you don't have to answer this question, but I'm dying to find out what you think about the president's present mental condition. I mean, the media is merciless. And I'm wondering if this is affecting him and making him worse.
I don't have an inside scoop on the president's medical.
But just
I'm
observing.
not happy. I'm not happy with what I see. I don't think that something like that should be running our country.
And
So does it have the
aren't
power
we
to
making it worse by accusing him of being disabled mentally, constantly?
Well, that's politics, but yeah, that's above my pay grade.
As a procedure, I mean, when older people go into the doctor's office, is there a test for this gene? Do they do it very often to find the gene?
No, it's not often enough done. But we do with those that are enrolled in the study or those who want to have it done, even if they don't qualify for the study. It's a cheek swab that we do. And it's a whole genome kind of a thing off of a cheek swab. So it's non-invasive.
Oh, that's cool.
I mean, like I say, this True DNA company has done tremendous job because they've got the cost of doing this down to just a few $100s, several hundreds of dollars. I had one patient with frontal temporal dementia, and this was before we started the cross DNA study. And I wanted this one gene that seems to be affected for that. And there's an NIH study going on even right now. And if you are positive for that one gene, then she would qualify for the study. right? So I wanted to get her into that study. I found one lab in Oklahoma that would run the study, that one gene alone was over $1,000, right? So
And
to
just
do your whole,
one
ahead.
quick thing, if, I heard something about the rate in which you exercise, if you shuffle around when you walk really slow, or that might determine you might be more, you have to do a certain rate with your exercise to be helpful. You know what I mean, for Alzheimer's?
well, so you do want to get your heart rate up, right? When you're doing the aerobic kind of exercises. I mean, some people, because of the brain disorder, they're going to be shuffling because that's what they can only do, right? But even then, I would say keep moving, right? I mean, it used to be with most diseases, we'd say, just lie in bed and stay there for a while, but then you get deconditioned, right? So now, I mean, even with arthritis, I'd say push past the pain, get up and move, right? So we got a gentleman here.
Back in the late 1950s, as a young child, I was sick and I don't know what it was, but I was just sick, laying in bed and in a darkened bedroom. And my mom had to go out and do some shopping, and being the type of kid that I was, I got out of bed, went outside to just kind of be outside, and it was a beautiful sunny California day and the birds were chirping, and I just started feeling great.
Right.
And I didn't want to tell my mom when she got home that I feel great, because I was in school. I didn't want to go back to school.
Right.
But I came up with this theory then, and I think you're substantiating it, that the mind kind of controls the body. And to the point where I remember I met a young man at church who came to church with a cast on, and I said, how long are you going to have that? And he says, about 3 months. And I go, oh, that's stupid. I'll tell you what you do. You visualize that break in your arm, and you visualize it healing, which is what I do. If I visualize bugs or whatever, and germs in me, and I visualize white blood cells fighting that.
Right.
And he was out of that cast in about 2 weeks. And I really believe that the mind can heal itself.
Well, I'll give you a great example. There was a pilot who crashed his plane, and he survived the crash. He was paralyzed on a ventilator, could hardly, he couldn't eat on his own, right? Everybody had to help him do his thing. And they basically told him, you're going to be this way for the rest of your life. And he just, he couldn't really laugh at him, but in his mind, he laughed at him, said, I'll be walking out of this hospital by Christmas. And he did, off of the ventilator, which was, it's a truly amazing story, but the power of the mind really is that powerful. And it's easy, and it's sad, because as doctors, we oftentimes take away people's hope, right? We can give you people want answers, so we give you a diagnosis, but, particularly with cancer, we tend to take away people's hope. And I wish there were a better way, right? We don't want to give people false hope, right? Everybody's different, but for those people who can harness the power of their mind, there's some amazing things. There's a chiropractor that was on it was on a race, right? It was one of those triathlete races, right? And he was riding his bicycle, and of course they have the road blocked off, right? But somebody decided that they didn't need the barricades. So they went going past the barricades, hit him from behind, threw him up into the air, and then kept on going and ran over him, right? And he survived. I don't know how, but he had a completely fractured back and was paralyzed from it. And of course, the doctor said, you have to have this rods and pins, and we're going to do this big surgery on you just to hold you together. And he said no. And he had his friends take him out of the hospital against medical advice. He had really good friends, because he needed his friends to help him with everything you can possibly imagine needing help on for months, right? Feeding and eliminating and all that kind of stuff like that. And he just laid on his stomach until he healed. And to this day, and he would not be walking, even with rods and stuff like that. I don't think he had been walking, but he's walking today, right? So the power of the mind is that powerful, right?
Dr. Turner, just last 2 minutes
Okay.
to sum up, because you've talked some great information, and I do appreciate it on behalf of ElderQuest and the fact that we've been able to record this. I just want to let people know that with your permission, Gerhard has recorded this, and we will put it on our YouTube channel that's not restricted like we have our other classes, so that you can just go on there. You can ask your friends to come on, so you can learn this information, because we've always said information is power. But if you would just take the last couple of minutes and talk about caregiving, because we may not have Alzheimer's, but we may have family members and things like that. What can we do to help alleviate or things of that nature? I know it's a big subject. I just asked you to combine it into 2 minutes. So let's see how good you are, sir.
Okay, we're taking another hour or two lecture and turn it into 2 minutes. So yeah, caregiving is a big thing, because when somebody does have a neurodegenerative disease or any illness that you have to be a caregiver for, that's a big thing, right? And the number one rule in caregiving is, in my mind, is you have to take care of yourself first, right? It's kind of like being on an airplane and the oxygen masks drop and they say, put your own mask on and then put it on your kid next, right? So if you're caregiving, and I've had patients who've been caregivers their entire life, like their whole identity is wrapped into being caregiving. Whether it was a child that was special needs, or a husband that had problems early in life with medical problems, or elderly parents, or combinations of all three at one time, right? Which can be really overwhelming. So I think the number one rule is you got to take care of yourself first, which means you do have to eat healthy, lots of berries, lots of vegetables, get some exercise in, take the time to do all that kind of stuff, and get help, right? There's aging services, there's visiting angels kind of groups, or any kind of hired nursing assistants that can help you at home. But you got to have time to get and have your own life as well. And if you get locked into only taking care of the person sick without ever taking care of yourself, then your mood will go down, your belief system will be altered, and it'll be hard, right? And caregiving is a hard thing. I have children with special needs. I can tell you from personal experience, caregiving is a hard thing. But it can be done.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. That's our class for today.
Thank you.
You want to talk to Dr. Turner for a little bit afterwards as we set up for our next class? Feel free to do so. I'm sure he'll answer your questions.